What's going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to use the true big fish bait that 50% of anglers are scared to even use. What are we talking about today? We are going to break down the Flutter Spoon, man. This is one of my favorites just for the origin story alone. Not only that, this bait catches absolutely monster bass, and it is a bait that, you know, your more experienced anglers, yeah, they fish them, but I feel like there's a lot of folks that come to Lake Fork. Y'all let me know in the comments. Some of y'all probably use them, some of y'all probably don't, but I feel like a lot of folks are scared to use this bait. It's a little more pricey bait. It has a big treble hook hanging off of it, and people are scared to lose them out here on Lake Fork and all this timber that you see behind me. It's very visible right now with the lake being low and obvious how much timber we have in the lake, but it's always there even when you can't see it, and people are scared to lose these baits that you pay $10 to $15 for, usually on average, at least 10, usually more than that. So I'm going to teach you guys a couple things today. I'm going to teach you everything that I feel like you need to know, or at least I'm going to teach you everything that I know about how to catch big bass on this bait. But not only that, I'm going to teach you guys how to not lose these baits, even though you're throwing a treble hook bait in some pretty gnarly situations at times. All right, let's get you guys set up with the right gear first. First thing is Flutter Spoons. Now, there is a gazillion, well, not a gazillion, there's plenty of different Flutter Spoon options on the market today, right? There is. But this one right here is actually the original. It's the very first Flutter Spoon ever made, and it still to this day is my very favorite. This is the Big Joe Flutter Spoon. This bait was invented right here at Lake Fork. Another reason I just love it is just, like I said, the origin story alone. This bait was invented right here on Lake Fork by a gentleman named Joe Spates. He's a good friend of mine. I've been fortunate enough to become good friends with him over the years because he's got some crazy stories. And really what's funny is the way this bait came about is Joe was out fishing and he saw a big huge gizzard shad porpoise on the surface and saw a big huge bass, bigger than anything he'd ever seen, porpoise right behind that shad, and he thought, man, I need to find me something that looks like a big shad. And what looks like a shad? And back then he was like, well, a spoon looks like a shad, but all the spoons that he knew of back then were all smaller spoons and whatnot. So Joe got to work on coming up with this, and I've actually seen the old original prototype, which is all oxidized and beat the heck in back, as you could probably imagine. Actually, the original prototype was much thinner and much lighter than this, but it fell at such a slow rate of speed, he didn't feel like most fishermen would be willing to wait for that bait to fall. So, you know, I've gotten to know the story from Joe over the years, and he tinkered and tinkered and tinkered and tinkered and finally ended up settling on this design right here. Now, like I said, there's many others on the market today. This one's still my favorite. There's a couple reasons why I feel like this spoon is better than the others. It's not just because a guy I know makes it. It's made here at Lake Fork. I mean, sure, that helps in my own biased reasons, but the reality is this spoon is made of a different material. Most of the spoons out there are made of steel. The big Flutter spoons you see are made of steel, and that's because steel is cheaper than the material this one is made out of. Now, that's kind of a trade secret of Joe, so I don't want to give that away. And he's been kind enough to share it with me over the years what this spoon is made out of, but it's a different material. It costs him more to make them because of that, but what that does is that greatly affects the way they fall and the rate at which they fall, which, as you can imagine, can affect the bite. I feel like just the different material and the different fall, you got a guy that kept this to himself and didn't sell it and kept it secret for years and years and years before he finally released this on the market. And he tinkered with it till he got it right and made sure he was using the right material. There was nobody else making a steel Flutter Spoon at that time or anything else. So he used the material that he thought was best for it. And I think that shows in the bites that it gets. I fished this spoon right beside other spoons in the same boat, in the same schools, and there's no doubt about it, this spoon gets bit more often than the other ones do. I think one of the other reasons that it gets bit more often is the dressing of the hook. Again, if you look at that hook, that's not a feather on that hook. And I don't think Joe makes this any secret, so we'll go ahead and tell y'all. Guys, this is Mylar. I would highly encourage you to tie your own Mylar on your flutter spoon hooks, because I don't know of any other flutter spoon. I'm not saying there's not one, but I don't personally know of any other flutter spoon that has Mylar on the hook dressing. Now, Mylar is pretty cool looking in the air. It kind of has some iridescent factors to it. It has different colors, but when you put it in the water, it almost comes alive, man. The different colors that flash, and especially as that spoon is doing its thing, fluttering down, kicking, doing what a spoon does, the way that Mylar flashes is just another thing that attracts fish better than the typical feather dressing that you get on most of your flutter spoons out there. So that's the two main reasons that I think this spoon's better than others. Number one, it's made of a different material. It has a different fall rate, a different kick, a different flutter, and then the dressing on the hook is another added bonus to me. The rest of the gear that you're gonna need to throw this bait, I like to throw it on 15 or 17 pound fluorocarbon line. It doesn't seem like very heavy line, but man, you do not want to horse fish on a flutter spoon. You want to take your time. We'll explain that later when we get up on the front deck and talk to you about how to fish it. The rod that I'm throwing on, it's actually some new rods that I'm working on, so stay tuned for that, folks. We might have some rods coming out soon, but this is a new rod that I'm working on. But the one I've been throwing on this year has been a 7.6 medium heavy, but I will tell you, this 7.6 medium heavy has a little more bend in it. You almost want to throw a flutter spoon, to me, on a cranking rod. You want something that has a lot of bend to it. It needs to have a lot of tip. Again, we don't want to horse fish with a flutter spoon, and we'll explain that later. But you're going to lose a lot of fish if you horse them, and we'll break that down. As far as gear ratio on a reel, man, go with whatever you're comfortable with. I like high-speed gear ratio reels. The only time that I'm moving that reel, the only time that I'm moving that spoon with my reel handle is when I am bringing that spoon back to the boat, or I'm trying to burn it off the bottom to incite a fish to react to it. Either way, a high-speed gear ratio reel plays to my advantage. Also, if a fish turns and runs at me while I'm fighting them, having a high-speed gear ratio reel works. I use a 7.5 to 1, but you guys that watch the channel know that I use high-speed gear ratios on all my reels these days. So pretty simple for me. I always like high-speed gear ratio reels. And that means, to me, high-speed means 7 to 1 or higher. Now let's talk about areas that you're gonna fish it. You know, where I'm sitting right now, I don't have a lot of confidence in, because we just graphed it. There's really, there's 2 fish on the whole thing. So not a lot of fish on this, but we're sitting on an old ridge that does get fish on it in the summertime. This might be an old pond dam. I'm not real sure about this one, but I know for sure I've got an old defined ridge. It looks like either a road bed or a pond dam that runs right here underneath the boat. It runs from over there on that side over to this side, runs right underneath the boat. But man, these flutter spoons shine on all types of offshore structure, whether it be points, pond dams, humps, road beds. It could be any of that. Road beds especially seem to work in the fall. You know, we're getting ready to go that fall transition time. We'll go through turnover where a lot of the fish will get kind of shallow and spread out, but then after that, you're gonna have that good shallow fall bite in the creeks, but then you'll also have that offshore fall bite, which always exists, out on the main lake. And road beds and pond dams seem to be two of the best types of structure to find these bigger fish on offshore in the fall. And I will tell you guys right now, the #1 bait for me to catch a giant bass in Lake Fork in the fall is a flutter spoon. And I've stood by that statement for years. I've been fishing it that way for years, and that's been my opinion for years. But before we get to fall, we've still got to finish summer. It's still summer. The lake doesn't appear to have turned over. I've actually been off the water here the last couple weeks, or off Lake Fork here for the last couple weeks. Back out on it today for the first time, and it doesn't appear the lake's turning over. The water temps have gotten into the lower half of the 80s, so turnover's got to be around the corner pretty soon. But for right now, if you can grab some fish up offshore, and really next year, you know, throughout the summer, a flutter spoon is a very viable option to catch some really, really big bass. And during the summer, especially the dog days like we're in now, man, I really like humps. And again, I like pond dams. And we said this in a previous video, a couple previous videos, but smaller tops and sharper drops. The later in the summer gets, the hotter the water temps get, I feel like those fish, they like to be on smaller feeding areas where they don't have to work as hard to chase the bait down, and they like a steeper drop off on the side. So for that reason, I really like humps at the end of summer, and I really like pond dams. Anything that's got a small area for them to feed in and a really steep drop off to deep water is kind of what I'm looking for. You can also find that around some creek channel bends as well, can serve is that same kind of steep drop-off area that those fish like to relate to as we get later in the summer. So now I need to get up on the front deck. I got to show you guys how to fish this bait, because there is a few different ways to fish this bait. It's not just throw it out there, let it fall, lift it up, let it fall. I mean, that is a way to do it, but there's some different things you can do to trigger bites out of schools. A lot of times out of schools that are inactive, you can trigger them and get them to react and start feeding like crazy with the old flutter spoon. So let's talk about that right now. One thing about it when you're fishing a flutter spoon, a lot of our offshore stuff, I tell you guys, make sure you make a long cast. And you know, you do want to make a long cast sometimes with flutter spoon because you want to keep the bait in the school, especially if you've got a school that's elongated and spread out. One thing that's bad about making a real long cast with flutter spoon is this bait is probably one of the most difficult baits to land the fish on after they're hooked up, okay? So the longer cast you make, you have the potential to hook up way out there. That increases your odds that much more of losing the fish. You're gonna lose some fish on a flutter spoon no matter what you do. Sometimes you're gonna lose them, okay? But there is some things you can do to increase your odds. One of the things is if you don't need to make a long cast to present the bait to the fish, then don't do that. You know, if you can be within 30, 40, 50 feet of the school and just make a 50 or 60 foot cast, please do that. It will help you land them. So we'll go ahead and just make a medium cast. And see, the other thing about a flutter spoon, it's not real accurate. Sometimes you might throw it over here and it might go over there. Sometimes you might throw it over here and it might go over there because that sucker will catch some wind. Now, one of the most important things is letting that spoon fall on slack line. You will get bites on the initial fall, but you've got to let that spoon fall on slack line. So like when I casted it out right there, I stripped some line, and what I do is I watch my slack. So if you guys know what I'm talking about, you put a little slack in your line, it gets that bow, and you watch it run away from you, and you just follow it down, follow it down, follow it down, follow it down. When you start to run out of slack, just go ahead and push your button and strip some more slack, and then follow it down again. But that spoon always needs to be falling on slack line, and you always need to be watching it, because when they hit it, they'll make your line jump when they hit it while it's falling. First thing I'm gonna do, this spoon's all the way on the bottom. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reel my line down, and I'm just gonna lift up. I'm just gonna swim the spoon up, and then again, following my slack down. I want slack in my line, but I don't want it to be so slack that I can't see a bite. So it's, if you can kind of get what I'm saying there, I'm watching my slack fall, but yet at the same time, there's still that bow. It's not just laying on the surface of the water. I can actually see my slack. So, you know, I don't just pick it up and then drop my tip. And that's not how you watch your slack. Using fluorocarbon line, your fluorocarbon is gonna sink and you're not gonna see a bite in that situation. So I'll lift the spoon up and then I follow my slack down. Watch it fall, watch it fall. And it just now stopped falling. So sometimes, you know, that flutter spoon will look like it's done falling sometimes. It'll go to flutter and it'll start fluttering, and your line at the surface isn't running away from you, and then it'll kick on down. So there's times like right there, it didn't fall till right there at the end. It'll actually, you'll swim it up and it'll go and do its fluttering thing, and your line won't be running away, and then all of a sudden your line will start falling. So you gotta be patient letting that thing fall back down to the bottom. Sometimes it falls a little bit, then stops and flutters. It can trick you, and you think it fell all the way, and it didn't quite fall all the way. So that's the first way, and the way that you guys have seen me here recently on a video catching some fish. Probably the most common retrieve with a flutter spoon is that, and it's probably the one I do the most as well. Let it fall all the way to the bottom, follow our slack, and then just do the old lift and follow. That's what we'll call that, the lift and follow retrieve. Lift and follow retrieve right there. Now, another way that I use, you know what? I'm glad this just happened. We just hung this flutter spoon up, and I promised you guys I'd show you guys how to not be scared to throw this thing in some cover, because we got roots and, you know, probably some rock and shell out here, definitely some roots and laydowns out here on this ridge that have washed up over the years. So right now, as you guys can see, I'm hung. I'm as hung as you get right now. So now I'm gonna show you guys how to unhang a flutter spoon. It's pretty simple, really. What you do is you actually utilize the weight of that spoon, because it's heavy. So you utilize the weight of that spoon as its own plug knocker, basically, is what you do. So I'm gonna go over here and get right over the top of this flutter spoon. As I get over the top of this flutter spoon, I'm gonna start jerking on this rod. Now I want you to keep in mind, when I'm jerking on it, I do not want to jerk on it and dig it in more. So I don't want to jerk real hard. I really just want to pop my slack and kind of shake my slack. Hopefully that'll show up in what I'm doing right here, but I'm just gonna start shaking my slack. And all that's doing is I'm just trying to use the weight of that spoon to shake that hook out of whatever it's in, okay? So we're shaking, we're shaking. We're just now starting to get over the top of it. We're not quite there yet. And look at there, she's off already. That easy. Guys, this thing is its own plug knocker, I'm telling you. You can unhang it from just about anything just by shaking that slack. It's all you got to do. Now the other retrieve that I like to use is going to be a little different. This is one I use a lot in the heat of summer. I will use it some in the fall and other times you want to fish spoon. Mostly though, this is going to be a June, July, August retrieve right here. You know, on the previous retrieve, what I showed you guys, you know, we're swimming that bait up, but we're just lifting, right? Like we're not, in fact, I kind of snatched on it there a little bit, but you just want to lift it. It's just kind of a slower, like swim it up, let it fall. This deal is going to be a burn and stop. Now the key is you got to push your button every time you stop it. So I'll actually point my rod down real fast as I can, lift, and then push my button and follow it down. And I just push my button in case I need to strip any more slack. Like if that bait runs out of room to fall and I need to give it some more slack, I want to have my button ready to go so I can at any moment strip more slack. But just burn it off the bottom, lift it a little bit, then let it fall. It's always got to fall on slack line, guys. That's the key. If you let a flutter spoon fall, so if I lift that flutter spoon up and I go like this and I let it fall on a tight line like that, it's just going to go turn on its side and fall. It's not going to flutter if you let a flutter spoon fall on tight line. So you've always got to let it fall on slack line. That's why I'm so adamant about preaching that over and over to you guys. Then the last retrieve that was taught to me by none other than the guy that invented the bait. So I probably should do it more than I do. I really don't do this very often. But he tells me this works dynamite. I don't know if I ain't got the patience, but he'll actually fish this thing kind of like a Texas rig worm, especially on road beds and flat areas. He'll just kind of take it, hop pop it a little bit, where it's not really doing much. It's just fluttering a little bit off the bottom, then right back to the bottom. So this is a technique where it's really not getting off the bottom hardly at all. It's just like a big old dead gizzard shad out there that's on his last legs, about to die, and just waiting on something to come slurp him up. We might ought to call this the catfish retrieve, because it's probably going to catch you a catfish imitating a half-dead shad like that, I guess. I don't know. But old Joe that invented this thing tells me to just give it little small hops where you just almost lift it off the bottom and let it fall right back down. Now on all of these retrieves, on this lift, as you've seen in videos recently, my bite will come right now, and you'll see me just reel down and then pull, and that's all I do. There's none of that, okay? I never set the hook, I never jerk. On a flutter spoon, if I get a bite, boom, I get a bite, just reel down and lean into it just like that. And really, I set the hook, if you'll pay attention in those clips, I set the hook with my reel handle even more than I do my rod, okay? So again, lift it, bait's falling, which is where most of your bites come, boom, I get a bite, I'm gonna reel down and just keep reeling as I lift my rod. And that's all you have to do to set the hook. Now the important part, once you get the hook dug in, once you get the rod bowed up, that's where the important part of knowing what you're doing with a flutter spoon starts. Now, it begins with having the right rod. Like I told you guys earlier, it's a 7/6 medium heavy, but as you can see, that rod's got a tremendous amount of bend in it right there, okay? That rod will turn around and point right at me. You want a rod that has a lot of bend for a flutter spoon. Once I've got the rod dug in, I really want to let that fish do his thing. I do not want to be jerking on that fish and winching him and pulling him up. I don't want the fish to jump. That's the whole key. If you can keep the fish from jumping, you don't want him to jump. And once you've got that rod dug in, if you'll just kind of let that fish dog you and swim and not really pull him unless he's coming to you, a lot of times those fish will stay down. Now, I say that being willing to fully admit that I suck at it. Like, I get them to the surface every time, man. I can't be patient enough when I'm fighting these fish. But I will tell you, the times when I felt like I've done a really, really good job of being patient and I didn't pull on the fish too hard and I let the fish do his thing, I've never lost a flutter spoon fish when I'm doing that. The times when I lose a flutter spoon fish are when I get the fish up early and he jumps a little bit out, pretty good ways away from the boat. That's when you lose flutter spoon fish. The reality is that fish usually 9 times out of 10 has one barb in that treble hook, and he's got all of this heavy metal is leveraged to rip that little treble hook out when he goes to slinging his head around. Okay, so that's why it's so imperative to keep that fish down. And if you'll just be patient enough and let that fish wear itself out and use a lighter action rod and use lighter line, that makes it easier for that fish to stay down. When he's dogging you and you've got a lighter line and lighter rod, it's easier for him to stay down. He feels less resistance from you, so there's less pull to the top on your end when you use the lighter gear. That's why we do that. But if you'll be patient, what'll happen is that fish will eventually just kind of start wandering towards you, and you just slowly reel him in and he'll come up to the surface and almost lay on his side for you. They don't even hardly fight. When you take your time and let them wear themselves out swimming all around, they don't even hardly fight when they get to the top. It's something I didn't really believe. So if you don't believe me, that's fine. I understand. You think I'm full of it, you think I'm wrong, that's okay. I thought all that was wrong too. The master himself, Joe Spates, was the one that told me that. When he finally told it to me enough times, he convinced me to try it. The times that I've executed on what he's told me to do, it works like a charm. Unfortunately for me, I usually want to jerk them to the top, and I end up losing some fish because of that. But one of the main things is get you a lighter action rod, get you a medium to medium heavy, get you a rod that's got a lot of bend in the tip, which is counterintuitive for throwing a bait that weighs as much as a big flutter spoon does. But just try that, and I bet it'll help you land more flutter spoon fish. Well guys, that's all for our flutter spoon instructional, man. I sure hope you enjoyed that, and more than anything, I hope that it helps you catch more and bigger fish. It is a great technique. I do feel like there's probably at least 50% of bass fishing anglers that just don't use that flutter spoon because honestly, they're scared to throw it. They're scared to lose it. They don't have the confidence to get bites on it. It's a little bit of an overwhelming bait to wrap your head around that something's gonna bite just this giant chunk of metal. We lovingly call it the hubcap because it's just a big chunk of metal, but it is an awesome bite. The intensity of the bite is something else. They hit it really hard. It catches really big fish, obviously, with a bait that big. It's hard to land them. I think a lot of people maybe quit fishing them because they have issues landing the fish. So hopefully the things we told you today, from how to get it unhung, that should reduce your fear and apprehension of using it. And also the gear to use and how to land these fish. Hopefully all those things will give you guys more confidence in the flutter spoon. And it'll add another tool that'll make you a better overall fisherman. And again, like I said, help you catch more and bigger fish, because that's what we try to do right here at your Lake Fork Guide. And by the way, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on your Lake Fork Guide.